Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Brian. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from Prog Pair. Time for the epic adventure, The Battle of Epping Forest by Genesis. My favorite from their 1973 album, Selling England by the Pound. Some consider it to be too lyrically dense, but I just love the energetic storytelling combined with loads of action and finesse musically. Yeah, that sounds like my idea of Genesis. They can be a bit wordy at times, but I've always for a lot of it, I kind of picture them as like poets on top of complex music. That's kind of my idea of Genesis. I know they have their longer instrumental sections, but that's not usually the first I think of, and it might just be what I've been exposed to as well. I can't say I've had any deep dives with Genesis other than The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which was a bit lyric heavy. Let's dive into this and see what's going on with the Battle of Epping Forest. Well, there is audio, it's just very quiet. There it is, left side. Alright, so it's called the Battle of Epping Forest, and we have a pretty standard marching snare with a flute. Definitely evoking militaristic music of older times, 1700s, give or take. This is not, but let's see what's going on. So we're in 5/4. Oh no, 7. Yeah, little embellishments everywhere on the guitars. The drumming is just infectious. Oof. I was feeling a 5 polyrhythm there, but I think we're still at 7. Also, that like palm muted chirping over there was interesting. Especially that it's paired against the full guitar picking on the right. Wild sounds over there. Ooh. It's interesting because so far it's felt rather linear. Yeah, man, the 4/4 cut to halftime, and then the organ over there is also pushing against it with its own polyrhythm, and that just made this whole section feel way off. Yeah, we're back to the 7. So this is the first time I think I felt an element of loop pulling back to something previous.
Security trade, she's got it made. The shops that need aid are those that haven't paid. I'll do my double show quick. Send me a brick, fresh out the nick. So cheap all day. The minute they leave and the visit I pay. Does it pay? And his friend, liquid land by name of wine.
And we're just sitting in this one for a while.
They called me the Reverend when I entered the church unstained. My employers have changed, but the name has remained. All began.
Yeah, so I mean, this kind of falls in line with.
Furniture followed a sign saying beautiful chest led to a lady who showed me her best. She was taken by surprise.
That progression.
I quickly closed my eyes, so she rang the bell and quick as hell. Bob the knob came out on his job to see what the trouble was. Louise, is the Reverend hard to please? Perhaps, sir, if it's not too late, we could interest you in our old-fashioned Staffordshire plate. Oh, no, not me. I'm a man of repute. But the devil caught hold of my soul, and a voice called out, "Shoot!" To save my steeple, I visited people, for this I'd gone when I met little John. His name came.
Oh, like a little
when the judge said,
spoken word.
"You are a robbing hood." He told me of his strange foundation.
Had another polyrhythmic section.
He'd had to hide his reputation. When poor, 'twas salvation from door to door. But now, with a pin-up guru every week, it was love, peace, and truth incorporated for all who seek. He employed me as a car mechanic with overall charms. His hands were then fit to receive all.
Trying to figure out that last polyrhythm between the guitar and snare. Because now we're firmly sitting in 4/4. Oh, and we're back. The last section was 5. This one we're back to a 4.
Still not quite sure. 5 acorns fell out of his
Yeah, that's fun. Got a nice bounciness to it.
Up above the crowd, inside there's the cloud, done proud, the bold and brazen
Oh
brass.
man, that's something that shows up a lot, is a 16th note into an emphasized on the beat.
Just like any picnic. 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 Picnic.
We're reprising that a little bit from our intro. We have hand claps now too.
Forest road. The end of the day, the clouds roll away. Each has got its load. They'll come out for the count of the breaking of day. When the limos return for their final review. It's all through. All they can see is the morning dew. There's no one left alive. Must be a draw. So the black cat barons toss a coin to settle the score.
So almost like a bit of a somber ending until this moment, kind of picking the pace up. We arrive at that final chord sort of unceremoniously. We're just doing the fast guitar part, and then just out of nowhere, it didn't seem like we were at a stopping point for it harmonically. I didn't really feel like we were at a stopping point for it repetitively. A lot of this song, much like most songs, are based around four, well, multiples of four bar phrases, and so it just kind of happens, just kind of ends. We hit this note, and then we get a couple of tom rolls, and then, but we're done. Hmm. I have to keep that in mind. It's a weird ending, but honestly, when you have something this big of a song, I mean, there's so many words here, so many sections. How do you end it in a satisfactory way for everybody? I don't think you can. And so if I'm a little disappointed by it. That's just the price of doing business. Not everybody's art is going to work for everybody. Like I said, I might just keep it in mind and see what's going on. Maybe as I work my way through this analysis, maybe as we hit the lyrics, maybe something will make sense later. So, where do we start with this analysis? Let's start with structure. This feels very linear to me, but there are micro loops. And so, interestingly, what I came to the conclusion of was something very close to jazz, just the B section isn't a solo section, it's just a different section to our A. And our A is comprised by a lot of micro sections. We could call them A1, A2, A3, A4, and possibly A5 if I remember correctly. At that point, we loop back to A1. We go through the lineup again, but we don't make it all the way to the end. Uh, it gets cut short somewhere and we come into our B section. And the reason that I use numbered A's rather than saying A, B, C, D, E is because they're all very similar. The way that they're composed, the way that they're built up and layered, the harmonic resonance, the emotional aspects, the atmosphere, even the melodic aspect of the vocals are all very, very similar in all of them. They are more or less variations on our first idea. They just shift a few more pieces than I think most people would classify a variation. Um, if it makes you feel better to read them in A, B, C, D, E, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, A, B, C, something like that, you're more than welcome to. Um, but to me, so much of the first like 6 minutes all feels very samey to me, my brain puts them all into an A section, and then we have the loop of that when we go back to A1. So we have A B A. At least that's how I feel it. It's possible Genesis wrote this in elongated, having up to like J sections or something. It's possible. That's just not how I feel it. And so I think this song really benefits from being talked about and understood as two separate parts of the song. We have the A, which appears to be some type of storytelling with a singular, possibly a narrative, a narrator. And then the B section, where we get our vocal shift, our harmonic shift, our atmospheric shift, and we explore a vastly different side of the song. In a lot of ways, it doesn't fit, but being that Genesis writes the way that they do, which I'll touch on in a second, it makes perfect sense for that B section to be there. And so, looking at the A section, a lot of it is a variation on ideas we've heard before, a variation on atmospheres and emotions we've heard before. It really is more about how can we further explore this sound than what should come after this? What should the next riff be? And so it almost feels like at times there's a series of riffs or drum patterns or organ ideas that were written out that all were very similar. Maybe not the exact same notes and the exact same patterns, maybe not even in the same time signature, but all of them ended up giving the band very similar vibes. And so it makes sense to put them together, and that's exactly what they did in a way that felt very linear for a long time. And I think that's interesting too, because up until we hit that first repetition where I was like, oh, we've been here before. Up until we hit that point, I was like, dang, this is, very linear. Very rarely am I hearing something I remember from previous, but at the same time, I'm thinking, we haven't really gone anywhere. This is very long to exist in just this one sound. And it's really interesting to simultaneously feel like so much time should have passed and no time has passed at all. I am never really bored because they're always throwing me new ideas, rhythmic ideas, note ideas. But on the whole, it all feels like we were in that section forever. And it's a very cool way to go about crafting music and about utilizing the tools at your disposal to make something so contradictory. Why How did they make it feel like I had barely been listening at all, but also listening for such a long time? And, of course, the answer to that is how they crafted it, how they have several sections that all feel the same but are genuinely very different. And a lot of it comes down to textures and tones and atmospheres and emotions, keeping the listener in the same space if while giving them different things to chew on. And so it feels more like an extended scene of a film where the location hasn't changed and our characters might not have changed and what they are doing hasn't changed, but we haven't hit the next scene yet. If we were at a high point, we haven't reached, a valley where we can get off the edge of our seats for a second. Or if it's been a bit dull for a while, we haven't hit a peak yet. And that's what it feels like. We're just always in this one moment and we're just waiting for the next section to come up. But every time something new happens, it's an addition to where we were, and to me it feels very much like storytelling, and I think that's why I immediately went to film with my metaphor. I think it also doesn't help that the lyrics never seem to repeat. I don't think I heard a single chorus, and the few times I did tune into what the lyrics were saying, it seems to be rather storytelling-esque, which is pretty typical for Genesis. In fact, the couple of songs that I've heard off of this album follow in a very similar pattern of all the lyrics being storytelling. And so it makes sense for the music to follow that same pattern of giving you more details without changing the scene. And depending on how you feel about that scene, it could feel like it's dragging or it could feel like it's rushing. But at the end of, the section, you've still kind of absorbed a lot of information. Now, when I said we'll get to the B section in a bit. When I had said that it fits Genesis's writing style, what I meant by that is a lot of their music, in my experience, tends to be a bit on the linear side. The ideas don't always work together, much like I was talking about the A, which the various sections of the A all feel very congruent. But the B section feels completely out of left field. And I was thinking about some of this early on in the track as well. Within the first minute, the opening minute, I think, we explored a couple of ideas that they worked together, but they didn't perfectly fit together. It's like smashing a puzzle piece into another. It didn't necessarily go there, but you shaped it to make it so that it should go there. And this is something that I've picked up with Genesis's writing over the years of being able to explore them. Is that they don't tend to write music from a musical perspective. Whereas most bands would say, hey, this is a pretty killer riff. Let's, jam out. Basses, you can figure out what you want to play under it. Once they figure that out, they're like, oh, what's next? Well, what should come next? Let me think in my mind, this is what we were playing. Oh, this sounds like it should come next. Let me figure out how to play that. And then the band would figure out, what goes along with it. Very music first. I don't get that idea with Genesis. A lot of the music tends to be based on what is happening in the story of the lyrics. In a sense, the music is the props to the narration. They help sell the scene or they help sell an emotion. And in that sense, we don't typically have clean transitions between ideas. We don't typically have ideas that are cohesively played together. Even if there is a nice transition between two ideas, it's not necessary that the two ideas make sense against each other on a purely musical level. What is the point, though, is to make sure that the music matches what the vocals are singing about. And this song feels like that at times. Even within our A section, as harmonious as the emotional aspect is, and the fact that all the timbres are rather similar throughout, and it has a very samey vibe through it, there's a lot of questionable decisions. Um, Even looking at single instruments, forgetting about the context around them, there are decisions in some of the instruments, how they're played, what notes they're playing, that make really little sense until you go about pairing it with the lyrics and figuring out what's going on in the story and saying, oh, so that's representing this. And that's something I don't usually get to do in these reactions because I look at the music first and then I check out the lyrics later, completely devoid of their placement in the music. And I think it's why Genesis has typically interested me, but has bounced off of me as well. It's a group that I'm always interested in checking out. They do really wild things with their instrumentation, with their composition, with their performance, but they've never quite grabbed me. And I think it really is because the music and lyrics are, for the most part, intertwined. And to listen to them separately, well, it undercuts both of them. The lyrics, they're just a story at that point. They don't necessarily need the music. And the music relies so much on the lyrical context that it feels awkward in places or unnecessary or confusing because it's missing its context. So, I mean, I'm a bit late on this. I wish I had this mindset many reactions ago. I wish I would have had this mindset during the Broadway album reviews for sure. But I'm glad I have it now. It's really going to help going forward, and it helps with understanding this track right here. Because when the guitar just randomly starts playing these really small staccato palm muted notes that honestly the notes themselves don't even make much sense pitch wise, and it's such a strange timbre coming out of the left side out of nowhere. There's no lead up to it. The guitarist just starts playing in that style. Or when the time signature shifts. I mean, that I'm more used to because prog metal and prog rock are both really big on metric modulation. So all the time signature changes are sort of par for the course because I'm used to that in other bands utilizing this genre or written in this genre. But Genesis is, they're one of the few bands I think we've covered on the channel that I would say are lyrics first and instrument work second. It's supportive to the story. And they're just so intertwined. And so when I said, that was a weird decision, but that's just Genesis, their style. That's what I was talking about. A lot of these musical ideas make absolutely no sense in a vacuum. They make no sense without the lyrics. They make no sense without fully exploring the themes of the song. They make no sense without, outside of what is specifically happening at that moment. There's a few ideas in this song, even, but across a lot of their works, where you'll have a one off idea that makes no sense in the music, but makes perfect sense to pair with a specific, phrase in the lyrics. And it's really difficult to analyze Genesis without bringing everything together. With that said, we have a drastic shift into the B section. We have a vocal delivery change, something that, at least to me, is supposed to sound very posh and snooty. Um, and the couple of words I picked up on, there was definitely some entitlement or something going on with the story at the time. but it's the first time we had a delivery shift as well, which, especially since we've listened to some other tracks where there are characters and the characters have their own voices. I'm assuming that's what's going on here. And we have shifted from possibly an omniscient narrator to a specific character in the story, or maybe another narrator, which would be interesting. Very few things I've ever read or watched have had multiple narrators. That's actually a really cool concept. I don't know if that's what's going on here, but that's got. If anybody has seen a film or read a book with multiple narrators in it, omniscient narrators, like narrators with personality, I think is kind of what I'm thinking of. Where like one narrator would describe and focus on would describe an event focusing on specific things that were important to them possibly, and another narrator might tell that same scene with like different details because different things were important to them as a narrator. But they're both like not characters in the story because you can shift perspective that way, first person perspective for multiple characters. I'm talking about like omniscient narrators, but like multiple in the same. That would be wild. Anyways, I got to get back on Genesis. Typical Bryan side rant. Um, the B section, vocal change. I think we got a perspective change as well, and because of that, we have a different person, I think, and a different side of the story to explore. The music completely shifts, and it takes on a completely different atmosphere, a completely different emotion. The instrumentation is wildly different. The roles that the instruments have are changed. We aren't in this section for very long, but it's immediately noticeable when we hit it, and it's immediately noticeable when we leave from it and return back to our A section, which I think we hit A1 coming out of it. Um, and I'll tell you, when I was listening to this track, it made no sense to me. The lead in into it is rough. It doesn't pair well with anything in the track. It's completely, out of left field as far as when it comes in and what it does, and it just has very few connections to the rest of the track. But if I'm correct, and lyrically we're exploring a new perspective, it makes sense for the music to shift its perspective as well because that's how Genesis writes. And I'm like I said, I'm really glad I came to this conclusion in this track. It's finally clicked with me for whatever reason. I'm still not a big fan of the shift, but if I look at the song lyrically first, I think it's going to work very well. Um, the last thing I want to hit on, it's not really going to be an in-depth thing because there's way too many complex moments to really dig into all of it. Um, is just the metric stuff. There were moments when we were in 5, when we were in 7, when we were in 4. Those were the ones I counted at least, anyways. There might have been some more going on, but it wasn't even just that we had different time signatures all over the place, and some of them also brought tempo changes, and some of those tempo changes weren't just like 10 or 15 beats, but like one time we cut it in half and shifted tempo, or sorry, and shifted the time signature, which was just bonkers to listen to. It's like being flipped upside down in a bottle. Like you're tiny and you're in a bottle and someone flips it upside down. It's a weird metaphor, but the whole world goes topsy turvy. There is no element of ground. There's no way to catch your footing at it. There is nothing consistent from that moment to the next as far as, metrics and timing and rhythm go. It's just a wild upending of moments, and it immediately makes me think, hey, I wonder what was being said there lyrically. What was the story at that moment? Because once again, it's kind of like what's the band? Not Dillinger Escape Plan. Between the Buried and Me, Ants of the Sky. Right? Every couple of moments is a brand new sound. Except here, instead of it just being, everything thrown at the wall and seeing what sticks, a very specific purpose. We did this because this happened in the story, and it makes no sense musically, but it makes perfect sense when you're in the story with us. And so it kind of makes me want to listen to this track specifically with the lyrics pulled up, which I'm sure Genesis fans are going to be like, finally, yes, dude, why aren't you doing that? Um, but I do think I need to give it a second go with the lyrics up and to feel the sections while I'm in that moment of the story and see if it makes more sense to me that way. But yeah, there's metric stuff all over the place. The tempo also gets changed with time signature, but also here's another crazy thing is that polyrhythms are everywhere. It is so hard at sometimes to find out what I think the intended time signature is because there's usually another competing pulse that is fighting the time signature. Or maybe I felt the time signature and I was confused because I felt another pulse. I'm like, oh, maybe that's the real one. And it is just all over the place with polyrhythmic ideas. I don't know. There might be polymetric ideas too. I don't really think I felt anything that crossed bars, which is really the big difference there. If you fit 3 beats and 4 beats into the same bar, that's polyrhythmic. But if you're in 4/4 and you have a 4.5 beat thing that goes on across 2 bars, which would be 9 beats over 8, that's polymetric because now you're dealing with multiple time signatures. It doesn't resolve itself within the bar. So that's a good way to remember that. If beat one, both of your pulses are starting at the beginning of their rhythm, they're both hitting one on one, that's polyrhythmic. You have multiple rhythms within a bar. If they don't, you're probably working with polymetric. You have multiple time signatures going on which don't align themselves within a bar. And an easy way to think of that is that if you have 4/4 and 3/4, the 3/4 hits its beat one on the fourth beat of 4. So just the time signatures themselves can't even line up at the beginning of a bar. All right. I guess now's the time to hit the lyrics. The lyrics are rather easy to read, much like I kind of assumed they were story-like. Tends to be what I expect with Genesis. I think this was still Peter Gabriel, right? Although I think, yeah, everybody's name. Peter Gabriel was on the team at the time. The team. He was in the band at the time. But yeah, Genesis is written by everybody, which is something really interesting. See, when I did The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, I wish I could remember his name. Someone emailed me, and they had this 36-page essay written about it. Because I got a lot of stuff wrong on it because I didn't understand how Genesis made music at the time. I approached it with a lot of theory in mind, and while they do use theory, they just wield it in a unorthodox way. As I mentioned, they use it to amplify the themes of the lyrics at that moment in time, not on a grander scale. Like a lot of bands will say, this is a sad song, we're going to write sad music. These guys say, this is a fun moment, let's write a fun lick. This is a, a different moment, let's write a different lick. And they craft this on a like a moment to moment basis. But part of this essay, like 70% of it was a breakdown, song by song, music by music, lyric by lyric. But the other part was a leading up to it, where the band was at the time, how they crafted music, how things changed. And I learned that Genesis tended to write music very collectively. But at that moment, for Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Peter Gabriel basically took over all lyric duty. It was sort of his project. And so, yeah, seeing that all their names are on written by, that makes sense to me. Where was I going with all this? Oh, yeah, it's very clear to read. Reads like a story. and it tells in a pretty linear fashion about a gang fight. The annotation mentions that there are two rival gangs fighting over East End protection rights. About a news story that it was based on this news story about this two rival gangs fighting each other. Um, where are they going? Oh, yeah, it's very clear in that manner, but I didn't know that it was about an actual news story. I thought it was all made up, especially with some of these names. We can just look at the second verse. It says, "There's Willie Wright and his boys, one hell of a noise, it's Billy Boys, with fully fashioned bugs, that's Little John's thugs, the barking slugs, super smugs." Later on, we hear about, oh, Mick the Prick, Liquid Len, the Reverend. Oh, this is in first person, though. I don't know how I missed that. Well, it's only during the bridge. They called me the Reverend. I think that's the only time I see it in first person. The bridge is also the longest part of the track. Yeah, we have all these characters with larger than life names. Um, and it talks about the events of this battle. There were no guns because it was a what did he say, gentleman's duel or something like that, which is interesting because gentlemen's duels are using weapons. Oh yeah. Oh, it also has some metaphorical sports stuff going on in here. It says, "With the umpire shout, they all start to clout. There's no guns in this gentleman's bout." So it talks about all the fist fighting going on, the hooks and the jabs, people getting thrown around. Another part says, "Amidst the battle roar accountants keeping the score." Another metaphor for the sports, and that's pretty much it. However, there is two verses that bookend this track. Um, the beginning says, "Along the forest road, there's hundreds of cars, luxury cars. Each has got its load of convertible bars, cutlery cars, super scars. For today, it's the day when they sorted out because they disagreed on a gangland boundary." So, on the outskirts of this battlefield are luxury cars, convertibles, out here getting ready to watch this. They already know it's going to happen. They've lined up pre-show and getting ready for it. The final section of the track says, "Along the forest road, it's the end of the day and the clouds roll away. Each has got its load. They'll come out for a count at the break-in of day. When the limos return for their final review, it's all through. All they see is the morning goo. There's no one left alive. Must be a draw," says the black cap baron. "Toss a coin to settle the score." So the rich people came out to watch the gangs, which are typically not rich people. They're typically more of your the poor of your society. Came out to watch them duel like a gladiator battle. And at the end, when everybody was either dead or knocked out, no one was left standing on the field, they tossed a coin to see who would be able who was going to control the land. Something they could have done at the beginning to avoid the bloodshed, but there would have been no entertainment. So while this is a fun, at times story, comically told in some ways, it's also some biting criticism about the class division at this time. While these people were fighting over their ability to control this area, with their gangs, the rich were also coming over here and watching it for entertainment. And at the end of the day, there was still a draw, so they found a different way to resolve this battle. But I think it's interesting that no one tried to stop it. Not that I think trying to stop gangs is a particularly easy thing to do. But they solved it with a coin toss that could have been done at the beginning. So yeah, it's got some biting commentary to it, which not outside the realms of Genesis. They actually the few songs I've heard from them, there's a lot of class division talk in their lyrics. So yeah, I don't really have a strong read of how these two sides work together, the lyrical and the musical. Again, that's something I would need to listen to it all together with the lyrics at hand while I listen to the music. And I'm sure moment to moment things are going to make sense. But on the whole, which is how most bands typically write their music, this is really difficult to find out how these two work together. But rather than frustrate me, which is what it typically does in the past, what it has done in the past, I think I have a better understanding of Genesis now that it's not a frustration for me, just an opportunity to better understand what they're doing on a next listen. Those are my thoughts on Genesis' The Battle of Epping Forest. Let me know what you thought of this one. Did you enjoy it? Was there anything that stood out to you that I missed? Do you have a different perspective on it? Longtime fans, if you have any help, any words of wisdom or your own ideas or anything like that, I'm sure there's a lot of things I missed and maybe a couple things I got wrong. Please let me know in the comments. Above the comment section is a description box. In there is a link for Linktree. In there you can find my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. That wraps it up for today. I will be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. We're going to unintentionally continue on with Prog Rock Week, checking out some Coheed and Cambria for childhood nostalgia theme, and looking at another special selection, which I don't think is going to be proggy. We got City of Caterpillar. And you're wondering how a top floor could replace heaven. That sounds punky to me. That is a long title. Uh, Pop rock, actually, maybe. It reminds me of like Panic at the Disco and Fallout Boy. They're really long, nonsensical titles. So yeah, I think prog rock, the unintentional prog rock block ends tomorrow with Coheed. But Genesis and Coheed and Rush, three back-to-back reactions is pretty good, especially as it was unintentional. Um, until next time, though, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.